I've eaten at almost 400 Disney World restaurants, and this experience has been my absolute favorite. But can it possibly be worth the $250 per person price tag? I am back at Takumi Tei to find out. Takumi Tei is located in EPCOT, and it is one of Disney World's most expensive restaurants with a price tag of $250 per person. Now, Breedlove and I did review this restaurant a couple years ago at this point, and at the time their plant-based menu was $100 cheaper. That is no more. The menu has changed, and it is $250 per person any way you cut it. In fact, it's so expensive that I literally got an email warning me about the price a week out from my reservation. Yeah. Now, Takumi Tei is an extremely upscale Japanese restaurant. It is run by the same company that runs the other restaurants in the Japan Pavilion. It is extremely authentic, one of the most authentic Japanese experiences you can find outside of Japan. Certainly the most authentic Japanese experience you can find in Disney World. The theme of the restaurant is that it celebrates moments of perfection in nature through Japanese craftsmanship, and it does have a celebration of those different elements throughout the theming. We will take a look at that. There is a brand new menu here at Takumi Tei, and it is now set to change every 3 months with the changing of the seasons. This is a similar pattern that you will find at Shikisai Izakaya, a much more inexpensive restaurant just upstairs. Now, I am extremely fortunate to be back at Takumi Tei trying out the new menu for our websites tonight, but for personal reference, I've been wanting to come to Takumi Tei for fun since I came for the first time for work, and I've been trying to save for it, but it is just so expensive that I haven't been able to make it happen. So that is the kind of experience we're talking about here. A very expensive meal. It's only comparable to things like Monsieur Paul, and then Victoria and Albert's is actually a little more expensive than this spot, but that's the level we're talking about. But without further ado, let's head inside Takumi Tei and see if this spot can really live up to its $250 price tag. Another fun thing about Takumi Tei is that the little waiting area right outside is on the outside of Mitsukoshi. There's still a Perry the Platypus here, which is not part of the restaurant, but you know, you can look for Perry the Platypus. Welcome to outside. I finished my meal and came out because it is a very quiet, peaceful environment in there, and I didn't want to talk to my camera during the meal outside of a couple of times that you'll see where something dramatic happened to me. I was in a room by myself, which was nice because then I could feel more like chill about filming, but going to fancy restaurants is hard. Anyway, let's talk about this meal. So first, let's talk atmosphere. Now, Takumi Tei means House of the Artisan, and it has 5 rooms, each inspired by a natural element used commonly in Japanese artistry. And those elements are water, wood, earth, stone, or washi paper. I was in the earth room this time. I was the only one in there, which was really nice. So it was very quiet, very pleasant. There is beautiful, calming Japanese music playing the entire time you're eating. It has a nice, like, dim lighting, but still bright enough that you can easily see everything you're being served. The atmosphere is just gorgeous. There are no windows, and it really does feel like walking through a portal into another place. So right when you sit down, your server will bring you a hand towel. I think it was scented with eucalyptus, so super calming. It was like aromatherapy to start your meal. Something that I noticed was that I didn't feel weird dining alone at all here. So I would say that if this is kind of a bucket list experience for you, but maybe you can't convince somebody else in your family to go with you, don't be afraid to try it out by yourself. I went with Breedlove last time, but I went alone this time, and I didn't feel weird at all, but usually I do feel a little weird dining alone. The menu is pretty actually easy to navigate because there just aren't that many options. There are 2 different omakase meals. Now, omakase kind of means chef's choice, and it is a multi-course meal. There is the Kiku meal and the Hassoon meal. Kiku being for meat eaters, Hassoon being for plant-based. They are both $250. Whew. They also do have sake pairings and wine pairings for an upcharge if you would like to do those. I did opt for one of their specialty cocktails this time. I opted for the Shochu Shiso Fashion. Now, it's not actually on the menu yet, but I heard it had some pretty cool spherical ice. So we tried that out. I thought that the Shochu Shiso Fashion was a delicious spin on an old fashioned. Shochu is a really tasty liquor. It has a little bit of kind of an earthiness to it, almost reminiscent of green tea, but it's still very heady and very, like, you know, tastes like a whiskey. The shiso acted kind of as bitters in this case, making for like a very green, peppery note that helped balance out the whiskey, and then of course they had sweetened this as well, and it was perfectly sweetened. I've been drinking a lot of old fashions recently, and this stood up with the best of them. There's also edible gold leaf in it, so how can you want to pass on that? Our first course was the Ichiyu Sansai. This course is supposed to be like your traditional salad and 2 sides, or soup and 2 sides, I think is what they called it. My server explained that basically in Japan it's very traditional to have a soup, a side of rice, and a salad as the start to your meal, and that this was supposed to be a play on that. So for our soup, we had a white miso soup that had a piece of tofu in it with that fried layer. I loved this. It was so delicious. The miso soup was so creamy. Typically miso soup is made with red miso. This one was made with white miso, which is where you get that creaminess from. Still super savory, super complex, the same qualities you recognize from a traditional red miso soup. And the tofu soaked it up so well. The deep fry on the tofu had this paper thin breading, so it wasn't overwhelming and meshed really well with the rest of the soup and the dish. And this first bite was the most amazing way to kick off the meal. I was just immediately impressed by the flavors here. Also, spoiler alert, there was a little bit of wasabi on the tofu, which I love wasabi, and it was just enough that you could taste it without it giving you any of that like shooting in your nose feeling. So absolutely loved this. It was so good. For this plate, they did recommend eating counterclockwise, starting with the miso soup, so I did just that. I am nothing if not someone who does, as recommended by the people who know more than me. This next thing on the plate was sea urchin sushi. That's uni. I did have uni last time I was here, and uni is a very challenging ingredient if you have an American palate. It has a super unique texture that I don't think really any American palate is going to be used to, but it is super rich and super delicious. So if you can get past the texture, I do think it's something worth trying at least once in your life. In this case, I felt like the uni had a texture and a flavor that was extremely buttery, but then there was sort of a smoky fishiness that sort of overwhelmed the flavor once it hit the palate. I would liken it most to something like smoked salmon, but if you elevated that 100 times to be much fancier, much richer, and with a lot more umami. I do not think this dish is for everyone, and my first thought when I did try it was that you have to be a sushi lover to eat here. It was almost immediately apparent, and it only got more apparent the more courses came out. If you do not love sushi, Takumi Tei is not for you. And if you love sushi, but you really love, spicy tuna rolls and California rolls, but you maybe never branched out, I would try branching out a bit before booking Takumi Tei. Next up on this plate was the tuna with ponzu. This was a salad. It was tuna, zucchini, and this ponzu jelly. Lots of jellies were featured on this meal. I was like shocked by the number of jellies. I know that like jellies are like a Japanese thing, but it was just a lot. I think this salad had a much more familiar fish flavor. Anybody who's eaten a spicy tuna roll will recognize the way that the tuna tastes in this. And then you've got zucchini and this ponzu jelly. The ponzu jelly adds like a gelatinous sort of fun vibe to this, but overall it was like a generally very delicious dish. So you're getting that classic sort of minerality that you find in tuna sushi, and then there was a ton of textural variation in this little salad just by itself. You've got the gelatinous of the jelly, the crunch of the zucchini, and then the sort of nice like meaty resistance of the tuna. Ponzu is a traditional Japanese seasoning too, so this obviously very much sets the tone for the rest of the meal. This is going to be a very traditional meal that pushes the balance of flavor. Everything was super flavorful the whole time, and this course really set that precedent. Next up, we have the sashimi course. Now, I'm not even exaggerating, life-changing for me. It was some of my favorite food I had ever put in my mouth, and it was just these perfectly prepared pieces of raw fish. I don't think that the sashimi this time was as life-changing for me, but I think it's because my life had already been changed the first time that I went. There were 4 pieces of sashimi on the plate: scallop, Japanese sea bream, a fatty tuna, and then chihiro, and then where's the other one? Skipjack. So 4 different pieces of fish. There were 2 pieces of each, and it was served with daikon radish that I think she said was to represent the Florida breeze, and wasabi, which was real wasabi, as well as a house-made soy sauce adjacent situation. It didn't have that like abrasive saltiness that soy sauce does, but it still had all of the great flavor, made for a great seasoning for the fish. I really enjoyed the sashimi course. This is some of the highest quality fish that you'll find anywhere. Melts in your mouth, super flavorful. By far my favorite was the fatty tuna, which brought melt in your mouth to another level. I didn't know that fish could do that when you put it in your mouth. It was so, so good. The only place I've ever had sushi that stands on the same level as the sashimi that you can get at Takumi Tei is in actual Japan, at a fish market. So it is delicious, delicious sushi. My favorite was the fatty tuna, but all of them had really beautiful cuts on them that brought out the natural flavor of the fish. The next course was Hassoon, and this was like a bunch of little small bites all on one plate. This wasn't probably the most fun course because there was just so much going on. So I'm gonna start in the middle and then I'll work my way around clockwise. The middle had tofu skin. So this was tofu skin in like a creamy sort of silken tofu mixture topped with salmon roe. Now I'm not a big fan of tofu or salmon roe, but this was really good and I couldn't stop eating it for some reason, despite the fact that I typically don't like those ingredients. It certainly had like a tofu flavor and sort of the like silken meatiness that you find from tofu. The salmon sort of bursts open and creates like a sea salty vibe that mixes so well with that tofu flavor. And I said this last time and I'll say it again, and I'm so sorry, but it's all I can think about. The salmon roe looks just like Nemo's brothers and sisters who die at the beginning. And I'm sorry for saying it, but it's just, we're all thinking it, okay? We're all thinking it. This next bite was spinach and shiitake that had been kind of cooked in a broth, and then it had tofu paste on top. This was kind of like, they were cold, but it was like a cold stewed veggies with almost like a peanut sauce. It was tofu sauce, so I don't know why it tasted so nutty to me, but it had a really aggressive nuttiness to it that went really well with the veggies. This was like a super clean bite. And I actually think that you don't get a ton of veggies on their own in this meal. It's a lot of fish and a lot of meat. So I really welcomed this bite. I was really excited to see egg cake on the plate. This is a super common, super popular bite that you can have in Japan. It tastes like cake. It kind of tastes like a more moist angel food cake with just the slightest aftertaste that reminds you that it's egg. Almost the same kind of eggy aftertaste you can get from a custard. Just delicious and sweet and so good. Egg cake rules, and we should have them more here. This next one had a pretty big texture switch up for me. This one was crunchy, chewy. Almost had like the texture of like less chewy fish jerky, and that's kind of what it tasted like too. Just definitely like on the fishier side, but with like that more like jerky, chewy texture. I really was excited about this. Anytime, like, although I love experiencing the more unique aspects of these meals, the jelly, gelatinous, fishy texture over and over and over again can get a bit much for me. And so it was nice to have this more like jerky, chewy, meaty, fibrous texture to sort of break up the monotony there. Up next, I'm not really sure how to describe this one. It had a super unique texture to it. I would call it bouncy, almost like a gummy, but that was a little bit easier to bite through, like a soft gummy texture to it. Big explosion of salty and savory flavor from that topping. But I would say this one was on the challenging side from a texture perspective. After that, we have eel sushi. I was super excited to see this on the plate. I love eel. It's my favorite type of sushi. And when the sashimi course went by and I didn't get any eel, I was scared I wasn't getting any eel. But no worries. The eel was to come. In fact, I get more eel later. I got a lot of eel. Eel has a super meaty texture and just an awesome umami flavor to it. And this was just the perfect eel sushi piece. It had that awesome, the way the umami came up and kind of sits in your nose like a beautiful aromatic, and it was already seasoned to perfection with some soy. Just mwah, chef's kiss. The salmon with lime, this was my only thing in the entire meal that I didn't like get. It was, you know, a raw piece of salmon with some lime and some like yuzu salt on it. And it was just, I feel like it hit a level of citrus that was just on a little bit on the bitter side. Like, you know, when you have lime and it's bitter, like maybe part of lime rind, and it's got that like really, really bitter citric taste to it. That's kind of, the salmon really captured that and ran with it. So it was on the bitter side, which I'm not big on any bitter flavors typically. Next up, we've got what they called the surf and turf course. And this one was fun. When you look at it on the plate, you're like, oh, that's the surf and that's the turf. Wrong. The grilled flounder is going to be our surf, and then the sushi looking thing is actually Wagyu beef, tempura fried, and with a house-made yuzu mayo on top. The flounder is marinated in a white miso, which I was really excited about because I really liked the miso in that first course that was also white miso. But I could really mostly just taste the flounder. The skin had a good amount of the miso flavor, but the actual meaty part of the flounder really just tasted like plain white fish, which was delicious with the yuzu salt and lime on the plate. I was wanting a little bit more of that miso flavor. I do think that this was a nice departure from having so much of the raw fish at this point, so it was great to get grilled fish. On the other side of the plate, we have the Wagyu, and the Wagyu was amazing. I think for most people, this will be the winner of the entire meal. The course in general is certainly the heaviest we've had, but you've got this rich Wagyu, you've got the tempura, you've got the yuzu mayo. So it's just this really fatty, rich, buttery bite. The yuzu salt that I mentioned with the flounder, they leave it on the plate. They tell you to try this steak without it, with the yuzu salt and with the lime. So you get 3 different flavor experiences. The yuzu salt's amazing. They should put that on chips. And in fact, last time we were there, Breedlove liked it so much that he asked for them to give it to him to take home. And I told my server that, and she said, well, do you want some? And I got yuzu salt, baby. They gave me some yuzu salt. Next up, we have the entree, and you have 2 options here. You can go with a lobster entree or a Wagyu entree. I went with what was recommended, which was the Wagyu, and I am so glad I did. In a meal of dishes that are standouts, this was a standout. It was so spectacular. When she brought it, I thought it was in a broth, and I put my spoon in it only to see that that broth was actually a sauce that was so sticky that it had almost the texture of honey. So lifting my spoon, it trailed down off of the spoon. It was wild. I did not expect it to have that texture. In fact, you can see in me holding the piece of meat to the camera, there's a window pane of the sticky sauce. It's wild. She explained that that was kind of a soy and corn syrup sauce, and that was similar to the earlier one where it didn't have the abrasive saltiness of soy, just more of the savory seasoning flavors of soy. The Wagyu in this was amazing, super thin and decadent, perfectly cooked, and it just gets coated in that sauce. And usually I'm a little bummed when I can't kind of control how I want my Wagyu sauce, because Wagyu is such a fancy meat that you kind of feel weird putting anything on it, but this sauce was so good and savory with the Wagyu that I didn't have any complaints at all. It was also little pieces of ginger on top, and those with the Wagyu kind of cut through the richness of the meat, just making for just an unbelievable bite. It was A5 Japanese Wagyu, so this is top of the line beef. The maitake mushroom and the bamboo shoots were perfectly cooked, and the bamboo shoots were really interesting to me because they did not taste like bamboo. They reminded me of new potatoes, which just added more to the stew vibe. I just really loved this course. Like I said, I was getting full on the last course. It did not stop me from devouring this. It was just so delicious, and that sauce just made everything so so comforting and cozy. It was just a delicious dish. I wrote down, this is a real winner, so you know. We are to the second to last course. I know my heart is breaking. This is Gohan Mono, and I found this course to be surprising. I was a little curious when she put it down because I thought it was strange that we had moved into such a heavy, meaty place, and we were now going back to lighter fish, lighter miso soup. But as soon as I tasted it, it just made so much sense in the story of the multi-course meal. It is cooked eel, and it was already seasoned with a little bit of soy sauce to it, as well as wasabi and ginger on the plate. And then this was the red miso soup. The red miso soup was an explosion of flavor. I love miso soup. I typically eat red miso soup. This was so much more flavorful than a typical miso soup. It literally, sipping it, it was just a bomb of umami and salty, savory flavors all throughout your mouth. Tofu and onions in it too. Just delicious. Also, something of note, the only course that had a spoon was the course with the sticky sauce. The soups don't come with spoons because you're supposed to sip them. She said that this one was a saltwater eel and the earlier one was a freshwater eel. This one is going to have a lot lighter of a flavor, and I definitely noticed that. It still had that meaty texture, And to me, it kind of sat right between chicken and fish. So I actually think like if you're trying to intro someone, or if you want to step out of your comfort zone with sushi, eel is a great way to go because it does have a more familiar texture in my opinion. Dessert! Okay, so dessert's an exciting course because it also comes with a traditional Japanese tea service. This and the entree course are the only two courses where you get an option. So for this course, I did swing for the pumpkin pudding at the recommendation of my server, and I am so glad I let her convince me of this because it was so good. The pumpkin pudding had basically like a creme brulee custardy kind of texture but without the caramelized top, but it still had the full robust flavors that you expect from pumpkin. I also noticed a little bit of that pleasant graininess you get with pumpkin pie, but it wasn't as sweet as pumpkin pie, and it didn't have any like cinnamon or anything to that. It was just, it let the pumpkin shine. But then on top of that was this delicious loose caramel sauce and a little dollop of whipped cream that made the not so sweet pumpkin pudding exactly the right amount of sweetness. It was walking the line between a light dessert perfect for the end of a heavy meal like we just had and a decadent sweet dessert that is just really satisfying as a standalone option. I was really, really impressed by this. I think I scarfed it down in like 2 minutes. In fact, you're probably watching footage of me eating it like insanely quickly. It was that good. I wasn't in a rush. And while this was happening, my server did do the tea service for me. So this is a traditional Japanese tea service. They bring a tea cart over to the side of your table and they brew a matcha green tea for you right there. Now, traditional matcha green tea is made with like, there's like a couple of steps in a Japanese tea service that I do not know. I did like a whole tea service experience in Japan and it was like eye-opening to the art of just tea making. That is just so far from what I know about how to make tea. But she basically whisked the matcha powder all together and her hand was moving so fast I like, couldn't even see the motion with my eyes. And then poured me this delicious piping hot cup of matcha tea. I'm not a big fan of matcha. I don't love the flavor, and what I particularly don't like about matcha is the powdery texture. When matcha is made this way, you do not get that powdery texture at all. I imagine it's from the speed with which she whisked. No powder taste at all. It was just like a smooth, warm, comforting tea. Still gonna have the really green flavors of matcha, but definitely not gonna have the powderiness to it, and it was not an overwhelming flavor either. Just a comforting, warm accompaniment to my dessert and end to my meal. So as you can probably tell, I was a really huge fan of the food, even though none of the individual items are something that I would think you would call craveable or anything like that. The experience on a whole is unlike anything else. It is a cultural experience, it is an educational experience, and on top of that, it's fine dining and everything's delicious. So I absolutely love the food, but there are a couple other reasons that Takumi Tei remains a standout for me when it comes to restaurants in Disney World and really anywhere that I've been. Perhaps the biggest one is the service. There just is not service like this anywhere. Not in Disney World, not anywhere else I've been. The service at this restaurant is spectacular. Japanese hospitality is world renowned. The Japanese are known for being polite, they're known for being friendly, and the hospitality is a standard that I think is well beyond most that you'd find in America. I found that when I got to visit Japan earlier this year, and I absolutely feel that every single time I visit Takumi Tei. I feel like I'm being welcomed in as a friend by my friends who are ready to share their culture of Japan with me. It feels like such a comfortable environment despite being kind of a daunting one. And then also another big thing that I've noticed with both my trips to Takumi Tei is that the servers do hand make little origami gifts to give you when you go. The little gifts I got this adorable little origami heart, and then this like really honestly like maybe I'm just sentimental, but look at this little card. It's origami folded and it's from Kurumi in her handwriting. It says, "Dear Stanford Party, thank you for coming back to Takumi tonight. I hope you enjoyed our new course meal and I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon. Have a good night." And it's signed in Japanese. There are a couple of little like hearts drawn all over it. It has the date so that I can remember when I got this. And last time I went with Breedlove, I did get an origami paper crane at the end of my meal and I carried it in my wallet with me for like a year. I'm not even exaggerating. This just feels so nice. Like it feels like they really want me there, which I'm giving them $250. So yeah, I mean, I sure hope they'd really want me there, you know, but at least I feel like it. We came to Takumi Tei tonight to answer the question, as my favorite experience after eating at almost every Disney restaurant, could this possibly be worth $250 per person to eat there? And I think that I've got the answer. For me, the answer is yes. I will be saving up to go to Takumi Tei again. It is something that I would love to do a couple of more times throughout the course of my life if I am lucky enough to be able to afford the experience, because it is, I think, so worth the money. The food is delicious, the service is so wonderful, and it actually is a cultural experience unlike any other that I've ever had within the United States. I think the closest you can get to having an authentic Japanese experience outside of Japan. It is so authentic compared to the actual experiences I had in Japan. Now, I say yes, but I don't know that you should say yes, this is worth $250 to you. Is it an extraordinary experience? Yes, but this is not the experience for your casual diner. If you are not interested in fine dining, this is just not the experience for you. And that might sound kind of basic, but I'll tell you another thing. If you are a casual Japanese food eater, if you really like sushi but have maybe never branched out, do not do this meal. You want to branch out before going to Takumi Tei because it is a wild step outside of your comfort zone. This is extremely traditional food and a beautiful meal, but it's also a bunch of courses of a bunch of really small bites of what could be really unfamiliar food to you. And if that doesn't sound appealing, there's no way you should be spending $250 on this. Even if it does sound appealing, I would kind of train up to this by doing some other Japanese meals. Maybe head to Shiki-Sai Sushi Izakaya here in EPCOT, which has very authentic Japanese food, but for a much more reasonable price tag, to see if that kind of experience is one you enjoy before you ever take the step to spend this kind of money. Because I'm not going to recommend this restaurant lightly. Is it amazing? In my case, do I consider it worth that spend? Sure. But I think also in my case, I probably will only be able to make that spend myself once, and I'll call it a done. Because that is just so expensive. But if you are someone who places a lot of weight on culinary experiences, if you want to have a cultural experience that takes you outside of your comfort zone and transports you to another place, then there is nowhere in Disney World that does it as well as Takumi Tei. So my final take is Takumi Tei is going to remain my favorite Disney World restaurant, but with a little asterisk in that it's my favorite experience I've had, but maybe not one that I would recommend to almost anybody. For that, I'll probably stick to something like California Grill, which is a lot more accessible and still a little fancy. Thank you so much for joining me on this return trip to Takumi Tei, or should I say, arigatou gozaimasu. And if you like this video, go ahead and like and subscribe. And now go watch our trip to Victoria and Albert's. I'll see you there.